Hey, I'm Jim, and this is the Love at First Sight podcast, a podcast for SaaS CEOs and developers that truly want to learn more about design and care about it, but they're not designers that find it too complex. In every episode, we discuss how to design products that become sticky and unforgettable. We dive into the topics of taste, UX, growth, and conversions, and we share practical tips and frameworks you can add into your development process. Enough with the intro, so let's dive into today's episode.
Thanks a lot for joining me again. It's an honor, and I love that we have the chance to discuss today and go deep into all these topics that we both have in mind. And we always start the podcast with a quick intro. I did not make the intro. I always ask the guests to introduce themselves and tell a bit of their story and what they're currently working on. So yeah, if you can elaborate on this, that would be amazing, and hear your story from you actually. That would be a cool one.
Well, first off, Jim, let me say thanks for having me. It's a real honor and privilege to be here. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. And for all you out there listening, I appreciate you joining in and hope it's a useful conversation for you as well. My name is Bob Baxley. I'm a software designer who lives and works in Silicon Valley. I moved here in 1990 when I was 27 years old. I'll let you do the math on what that means. I've been working in the industry for 35 years. Started on desktop products. So I used to work for a company called Claris, which was a wholly owned software subsidiary of Apple. It still is, actually. And there I worked on the first couple of versions of ClarisWorks, had some work in McDraw and some other products there. From Claris, I eventually, over the course of those years, moved into management, spent some time as director of design at Yahoo, where I led the team that worked on Yahoo search products, most notably launched Yahoo Answers and designed the original version, or helped design the original version of Yahoo Answers. Then had the chance to join Apple in 2006, which was a very fortuitous time to join what would become one of the most important companies in history. I joined about 9 months before the phone was announced. And I joined leading the design team that worked on the Apple online store. So if you ever went and bought Apple hardware at apple.com, that was the part of the product that I worked on. I know all of you went and configured your $15,000 Mac Pros and see how juiced out you can make things. Obviously, it was an amazing experience working on the online store, did that for 6 years, and then worked on the corporate side of Apple retail for 2 years, which was also absolutely fascinating, a very unexpectedly fulfilling experience, understanding retail and designing products that are used inside the stores by the employees. It's a fascinating aspect of design, working on employee experiences, and I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity. It made me see the world and experiences, whether that's restaurants or theme parks or movie theaters or whatever. It just opened up my eye to a whole different part of the economy and a different type of design and experience. I left Apple in 2014, I believe it was, went to Pinterest during a high growth period of that company, was there from 2014 to the middle of 2016. Then spent a few years kind of wandering around trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how I felt about tech. This was between 2016 and 2019. But then I decided I wanted to get back in the game and was fortunate to find a role leading design at an enterprise software company called ThoughtSpot. I was there for just over 4 years, and that actually got me a lot of exposure to what it was like working for a company that was largely based out of India. Although the company had been founded here in Silicon Valley and most of the execs in our headquarters were officially here, the bulk of my team and virtually all of engineering was located in Bangalore and various parts of India. So I did get to travel to India, especially after the pandemic and the quarantine. I did 7 trips to India in 18 months. Which is not something I would recommend, but it was quite memorable and meaningful to me. I left ThoughtSpot 2 years ago this month. And to be perfectly honest, at 62, I'm trying to figure out what to do now. I wish I could give you a clear story of what I've been doing, but after 35 years in tech, it's a little murky as to what you do next. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, okay, beautiful story, and it's always a challenge, like deciding what to do next. It's it's such a deep thing and so personal on where you find meaning, and it's a very tricky one. I went through a phase like when I went through a similar phase actually when I quit one of the companies that I was working for in the past. I was at a point where I was like, maybe I want to become a kitesurfing instructor. Like I'm into kitesurfing and I really love it. I'm like, what if my life wasn't into tech? What would be that version of Tim, for example? So I didn't do anything like that because then you start thinking about all the consequences. Okay, maybe I'm going to live in an island. I don't have this and that and so on. But it's a very interesting process to go through. because I feel like it really helps you kind of learn yourself kind of a deeper and understand what you truly want versus what you don't want. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I think I'm a little fortunate in that, the first time I saw a computer, I was 11 years old, and it was a very early stage Heathkit computer that a friend had built with his father. It was based on the original Intel 8, I think it was 4044 chip or something like that. And I just fell in love with computing. I remember the moment vividly, and it was almost 50 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And the only thing I can compare it to is you'll occasionally hear like Broadway stars talk about how they were a little kid and they went to go see a musical, and just being up near the stage and seeing all the actors and the singers and stuff. And they were just sort of moved by the whole theater experience. They knew that's what they wanted to do with their life. Like, it's sort of like that for me. I just fell in love with computing. And so like, I love tech in a really deep way. I don't necessarily love the tech industry as it's operating today, but I love computers. Right. And so I don't fantasize about going and being a kite surf instructor or really anything else. The thing I struggle with is, at this point in my life, how can I best engage with the industry to be useful to other people and to give me opportunities to grow and continue to learn and stuff like that. And, to your earlier point, I do think we're at an interesting inflection point where a lot of folks, especially if they've been in the industry for a while, but I think even some people trying to get started, they're looking at the industry and saying, is this really what I want to be a part of? And am I going to do what's needed to do to make this transition to more of an AI based work environment? And I think there's a lot of people I think there'll be a lot of people just decide to opt out. And to your point, there are economic consequences to that. But there's also some happiness and stability consequences to that as well. So I think there's a lot of people, at least in my circle, that are trying to make that understanding of the value prop. I could be leading a very different life than the one I'm leading. What does that mean?
Okay. Since you mentioned, like, I would love to go into that topic. Like, I'm really curious. 2 questions, 3, but first one is, what is the thing that made you fall in love with tech? Like what you said, that you have like a deeper connection with tech. So I would love to tap on that and understand how would you describe it. And the other part is like that you said the separation between tech and the tech industry and people kind of opting out. So what is the thing that you're seeing that doesn't feel right, and why you've seen people in your circle like opting out with the whole AI transition and so on? So yeah, these 2 topics would be really lovely to go deeper into.
Well, let me go back to the story of how I fell in love with computing. So again, I think for many people, many people on the call, they may not remember the first time they saw a computer. Maybe they remember the first time they saw an iPhone or something like it. But the computers and stuff, that kind of technology has been around long enough that you kind of have to be close to my age to have a clear memory of the first time you saw a computer. But in I think it was 1976 or so, maybe 74 when I saw it, there weren't that many computers around. The word computer existed, but only in kind of the mainframe corporate type of the word. There wasn't really this idea of personal computing. And my particular story, I was at my friend Glenn Wilkinson's house, and I knew him and his family through the church we went to. This was in Dallas, Texas. His father, Tom, was an engineer at Texas Instruments. And was sort of like your classic nerdy Apollo era kind of engineer with the white shirt and the pocket protector and the whole thing. And so it's not crazy that Tom and Glenn were building things together, And so Heathkit was a company that operated in the United States that would sell you the stuff you needed to assemble electronic components. So you'd buy stuff in a kit and you'd put it together yourself. Hard to believe, I know. But you would buy things like oscilloscopes or radios, or in this case, a really early primitive personal computer. And so on this particular day, I'm over at the Wilkinson's house, and I go in Glenn's bedroom, and it's a total disaster and a mess and everything. But down at the end, he has set up on a piano bench, he has this black and white monitor, and then this metallic box that's got like a keypad on it and a little LED type readout like a calculator. And then for the first time in my life, I saw a typewriter, like a typewriter keyboard that was not part of a typewriter. And it was connected to this metallic box through a cable. And again, I think it's probably pretty hard for many people to put themselves into that moment and realize how novel it was. But honestly, I'd never seen anything remotely like this. And so Glenn sits down on the ground, he starts typing some things onto the keyboard, and they show up on the monitor, which is also something I had never seen before. Like, TV was a broadcast medium. The idea that you could generate an image they would show up on something that looked like a TV monitor was completely new to me. And so he would type a letter and it would show up on the monitor. And I could kind of get my head around that because it sort of felt like a video typewriter. But then he typed two or three things and the screen started printing out a whole bunch of stuff. In retrospect, what he did is he ran a basic program, basic being a programming language. He executed a program and the program spit out a bunch of extra stuff. But again, in my mind, I had never seen anything like that ever. I had never witnessed something where you typed a few things on a keyboard and a whole bunch of other stuff came back in response. And in that moment, I think some part of my 11, 12-year-old brain sort of said, oh my God, like there is something different and magical and miraculous happening inside that metal box. And I do not understand it. I also don't understand humans, but they're also interesting. But I think there was something about the metal box that blew me away.
I totally get it. Yeah, totally.
And then I subsequently the school that I was going to at the time, one of the parents actually bought an early Wang computer, which again is like kind of a primitive PC. And I learned in the 6th grade, I learned how to program in BASIC. Which is an early stage interpreted computing language, very similar in structure to Python. And it turned out that my brain, just the way it was structured, was very well suited to programming. And so I fell in love with the concept of programming. And so by the time I'm 13 or 14, I was just absolutely in love with computing. And then it turned out that I just wasn't in a place economically that my parents could afford to buy me an Apple II, which would have been the obvious thing to get. They did take me to the computer store in Dallas, Mr. Micro, out in Richardson, Texas, just outside of Dallas. I still have the brochure in my closet right over there. I still have the brochure that I picked up that first day for the Apple II, which has an apple on the cover with the headline, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And I think on that, and I remember that visit to Mr. Micro really clearly as well. I think that visit as well is when I fell in love with Apple and when I somehow got attached to Apple. And then, it's a longer sequence of events, but I eventually discovered software design when I was 27 and I was working for Claris in Dallas as a sales rep. Which we could talk about the value of starting your career in sales. We could talk about that as well. But I started out in tech and sales, basically. And then it turned out that they had a UI job that they had opened in California to work on this product called ClarisWorks. And I came out and interviewed for that. And because I had previous experience running a graphic design studio, it turned out I was a good fit. In 1990, I was a good fit to become a UI designer. And that's how I kind of got started and moved to California.
Got it. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah, it's a lot of random stuff that has to do with things I bumped into and just the reality. And I think this is important for everybody to keep in mind. Like the opportunities that life's going to bring you are highly dependent on the year you were born. You don't get to be Steve Jobs if you're born in 1982. Like you get to be Steve Jobs if you're born in like 1958, I think, that's probably like 54.
Yeah. That's something that I'm experiencing more and more. Like since I started like getting into entrepreneurship, that's something that I started realizing, like the power of timing. Because many times I want to feel like, no, it's all about like the effort and coming out with smart ideas and being consistent and all these things. Sure, but also there is a timing aspect like that sometimes just happen only once. In a specific time. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. Most all of this happens only once. Yeah. Like you don't get to invent that. You don't get to be around for the advent of the web again. Like that was a one-time event,
That's very, very true. Talking about one-time events, like it's perfect path to jump into the tech industry and the AI stuff. And I'm curious there, what is the thing that you see on the tech industry and you're not like happy or excited about and what is kind of what are you seeing the tech industry that in terms of the direction that is maybe changing? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that part and what you see from your circle from people and how they react to that and how they feel.
Yeah, well, look, I think the pressure with generative AI is for everybody to move faster. And I think companies have understandably, and look, I try to be really non-judgmental about this. I have deep feelings about it and how I want to behave as a designer. So I do have like my own personal interest in things, but I also try to set that aside when I'm looking at what's happening in the industry because I don't want to cloud it by what I wish it was. I just try to be open-minded about what it actually is. In the industry right now, there's enormous amounts of money to be made. So there's incredible economic pressure coming from executives and from VCs and and investors and stuff. So there's just enormous economic pressure. People care mostly about how to make as much money as quickly as possible. And that means you just have to move fast. Moving fast is not what design is set up for. Design is this contemplative, let's take a moment, think about it, try to create something that we're proud of and that's going to last. And that works sometimes, but it probably doesn't work for a lot of companies today, because the idea of design is that I can sit and I can take in all this information, I can pause, process it, and then come up with a solution. But that really only works if the foundation that you're working within, that the foundation that the solution has to live within is going to be stable. So, for example, if we were really going to design something from the ground up, it could take us, well, let's take Figma, for example. It took them 3 years to go from starting the company to like having something they could show to users. They spent 3 years to build that. Like, there's no way you could spend 3 years today building the first version of a product, because the foundation on which you're building would be completely different by the time you were done in 3 years. So, in an era where the reality of the tech is changing so quickly, it may be that the smartest strategy is just to move as quickly as possible and see where it's going to go, and to not really have a big vested interest in what the outcome is. Um, that is profoundly unsatisfying as a designer. And I'm not at all convinced it leads to good outcomes for users, but it's not an irrational business strategy, sadly. And so I think that there are people who worked in a different era of design where you did have the opportunity to sit and think and make something you were proud of, make something that you loved, or something that had meaning and that you could kind of express yourself through, and that you could really touch and improve people's lives on the other side. There's a long period that's kind of what design was. And that's not really what the tech industry largely is right now. The tech industry is just a speed race right now. And so I think there's a lot of people that really like working the other way, that simply don't want to work the new way, which again is a perfectly rational choice on their part. So I don't criticize anybody for deciding they don't want to play anymore. That's totally rational. I think the people that are screwed are the people that kind of want to play, but they want to play by the old rules.
Exactly.
So they're trying to play, but they're trying to function in the old way, but they're living in a new environment, and you're just gonna be roadkill in that scenario.
Fully agree. I'm curious on what you're saying on the speed part. So you're describing like how design used to be, that you can go deep, like take your time, think, and make something that you're proud of. Like, what are the things that you're saying? I'm not sure if you have like a very specific examples of like maybe products or design stories of what is like the new version of design that doesn't feel that it has the deep thinking for you. Is it that you need to see that feature like next day, that this is the person that you've seen in the industry, or?
Yeah. So again, I haven't been in a regular operating job in 2 years. So everything I'm telling you is by anecdote and talking to other people inside other companies and reading people's LinkedIn posts. My sense, and some of the people I've been mentoring have recently gotten jobs, and they just talk about the velocity of requests and demands coming at them, and how in the past, if they were going to do, a design for a feature, they might expect to get a week or 2 weeks to be able to show a first draft of that feature. And now it's like a PM might bring them a question in the morning and expect an answer within a few hours, or certainly by the end of the day. And they're dealing with more and more engineering teams, and just the velocity at which they're expected to flip things around. Because I do think there's this sense that you could just feed an AI engine something like a PRD and it's going to produce some screens. Now, yeah, right. So that's not true, but
Exactly.
there are a lot of people who aren't close to the rubber that still think that's the reality, right? And there's also a lot of people that just think that's good enough, and I know a lot of what your agency does is growth design.
Yeah.
I think growth design is a really interesting model for where design in general might be going, which is my understanding of growth design when we did it pretty intensely back at Pinterest, which again was a while back, but still, we were running dozens and dozens of experiments all the time. And the thing that I realized with growth design, it was to not hold on too tightly to what you want the solution to be. You have to kind of know directionally, I want it to kind of be like this, but you have to be able to entertain a lot of wiggle room as to what might get there. and be willing to try variants that maybe don't feel right to you, but end up performing really well. And so it's this, most designers, like, they get really attached to the solution. Like, if you think about graphic designers, like Paul Rand did one version of the Next logo. Like, he didn't even show Steve Jobs alternates. It's like, this is the version, and by the way, you owe me a few $100,000. Like, that doesn't really fly today. And so I think, again, there's, the people that are buying the design just want something that's good enough as quickly as possible. And that's, again, I just think that's profoundly unsatisfying to most people who in their heart are designers.
Yeah. It's a very interesting one. I want to share some thoughts from my side as well on this topic, from the experience that I've seen. So one thing that I've seen when it comes to the tech industry is that there is a difference between bootstrap companies and VC funded companies. Like, it's something that I've really seen and experienced personally. We work mostly with bootstrap companies as a team, and it's not that they're super lifestyle driven or something. Like, they are more lifestyle driven even. Like, the CEOs are like, hey, this is a beautiful job that I created for myself. I don't want to just sell and become multimillionaire. I already feel like a multimillionaire because I have the life that I was planning for. So what the bootstrap companies have is very solid culture because it always starts from the leadership and not so much pressure from investors, VCs and all these things. And with the VC companies, I see like that's constant pressure, like faster, more, like hire more people. And I'm like, we want to move faster, let's add 10 more designers. No, but design doesn't work this way. I don't care, I want 10 more designers. And I'm like, they don't get it. And then you have people that are more like people, like, say, if you're like into insurance, some insurance, let's say brokers that are starting a SaaS product, they're not really product people. That's something that Steve was saying a lot. I've seen it in many interviews that he gave, that like you have to be a product person. It's a very specific type of person, like in terms of the thinking and the culture that you have. So that's something that I've seen in the industry in terms of the difference, and that's why I'm a huge fan of the bootstrap companies. And then on the speed, that's something that I'm kind of experiencing a bit on. Suddenly, I find myself multitasking more between many projects, but it's also like the teams are growing. So maybe we're reaching a point where we need more designers, let's say, and it's not an AI problem. But like with AI, it's really, I feel like it really comes back to the leadership culture. Like, how do the top people in the company think? Because this just kind of is going to expand to the whole company, right? It's like a family. The parents set the vibe and the culture, and this has a big impact on the family. So I really see companies in the same way. And if it's just like typical executives, AI is going to make them super delusional, if that's the right word. And they just think that suddenly there's this magician that can create solutions. Like what you said, that you can just give a PRT and you get something. Yeah, you're going to get something, but it's not the right solution. And if you're satisfied with that, then maybe you don't need a designer. Maybe you can just go and see this kind of a trust, like, or however you see it. Like, maybe you can call it good enough. But I feel it really comes down to the culture of the company, and how, like, what are the quality standards. I feel is one of the things that are going to dictate a lot on how designers work and everything. And how I've been experiencing AI is I feel like liberated in a way that suddenly I can build. Like, by build, I mean that I've been always saying that my problem with Figma and all design tools was that it was too much of a drawing. And I come from an engineering background. I'm like, I'm building a product. Like, it's like building that bottle. I want to feel the material. I cannot just create sketches and then hand over to an engineer.
Yeah, you have to be able to work in the medium in which you're creating.
Exactly. And that's something that I find really beautiful, and I find myself jumping between Figma and Claude, and like, depending on the phase that I'm into, on the design, like the levels, what are the details that I want to work on. So I find it's very interesting with AI how the design process is changing and how personalized it can also become to every designer, because you can just build your own workflows and everything. But yeah, when it comes like to the AI companies, because you mentioned the Gen AI and the VCs, I feel like there is a lot of madness over there where I'm like, hey guys, you really need to slow down and think more. And I feel like it comes down to also what you said, the economic pressure, that there are crazy bets on AI right now, money-wise, and they want them to work. And also the side that I've been experiencing and makes me sad as a human, like as a part of society, is the marketing side of AI. I'm like, guys, this is not a nice world to live in. Like, too much clickbait, too much trying to scare people, a lot of FOMO, and like, I believe that B2B could be better than like the trusty B2C content where like people always try to steal your attention, but it feels like it's becoming a bit similar. And I feel like the economic pressure is one of the big reasons actually that we see this kind of this madness, because they just need crazy returns on that. But yeah,
let me try to unpack two things in there. The first one is your split between bootstrapped and VC funded. A different way to think about that is between companies where the product exists to fuel sales. So it's like most B2C companies, the sales team is actually driving the bus. I think as designers we go, is it product led or engineering led? I think the bigger question is it product in the whole, the largest sense of the word product, not the role, but is it product led versus sales led, right? Is the sales team driving the bus, telling the product team what they need to develop, because then they can do more sales, right? And that's probably 90% of companies. But then there's another group of companies, which you're saying are bootstrap companies, which I think is true, but it's not always bootstrap companies, where the product exists and sales is in support of the product. Like, we're going to make the product we love, and the sales team's job is to go and sell it. And that's how Apple works, for example. Yeah. So like not to pick on anybody, but if we look at like Salesforce, for example, it seems to me as an outsider that Salesforce is largely driven by their sales team, and that they're adding 100%. Features and manipulating the product in order to address the needs of their of their paying customers, which is largely the same for Zoom. I mean, almost all enterprise companies operate that way. But then there's a small group of companies, maybe Airbnb. I actually think Pitch was one of these, one of your local companies. Apple for sure, but also Lego, Leica, Patagonia. There's plenty of other companies in the economy where they make something that they care about, and then it's the job of the sales team to go sell it. And so I think as a designer, you have to be really cognizant of which kind of company you're signing up for, because they do not change. If the founding principle of the company and the founders of the company don't believe in product and don't believe in design, they will never graft it on. It will never happen. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they will never, ever, ever be design driven. They just will never make that switch. So that's kind of one thread. The second thread I want to talk about is, the executives just coming to the design team and saying, just spit something in the AI and like, let's see what comes out. I think design, and I learned this at ThoughtSpot, I think the industry's done ourselves a huge disservice by not really showing our process in the rest of the company. Designers tend to, they take in all the information and then they tend to go into their library-like environment, and they sit together, and they throw around ideas using really kind of strange words and vocabulary. It's all kind of very secretive and stuff. And then they come out with 2 or 3 solutions, which, if they're good solutions, look really obvious. So if it's a really great UI, when you first see it, you're like, well, yeah, of course. Like, how hard could that be? That's so obvious. Of course, it's only obvious once you actually see it, but we don't really show all the other things that we threw away. So for example, when I was working on the Apple online store, we introduced a buy online, pick up in store feature. We did 82 different versions of that. We had 82 numbered versions of that feature. And when it finally shipped, it was 2 radio buttons in the cart. Do you want to pick it up, or do you want to ship it to your house for each item? That was basically what the feature came down to. But it took us 82 versions to get there. Now, if the executive team and the rest of the organization understood all the different permutations we were going through and all the different arguments, they would have thought really different about the design process. But what they mostly thought is that they told us some requirements, and then something magical happened, and then we spent all our time drawing them. And of course, drawing them is not the issue. And we just don't. I think, again, as a design community, we haven't really let people in to understand the debates and the things that we're considering to get to the solutions. So everybody from the outside thinks it's super easy. So then they're sort of like, it's natural then that they would think, why can't AI just do this? It all seems pretty straightforward to me. So I think this is one of those things where we've probably hurt ourselves by not letting people into the messy middle, not letting them see that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I've experienced as well sometimes. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to do more collaborative design. So one thing that it's a bit, actually, on the first part that you said, between sales driven and product driven companies, 100%. I find a way better categorization of bootstrap and VC funded. 100% agree on that. And on the second part, I fully agree. And on this one, One thing that I tried was doing more design workshops, so include more the team to design together. You lead the session, but they're part of the process, and they can see the deep thinking and everything. And it's something I'm actually a big fan of. And I realized in the past I was afraid, but I was like, no, I cannot show them all these ugly designs that I'm creating. Like they have to see the final cool thing. But actually, once I started experimenting with the workshops, I realized design is getting better. It's more fun, and the whole team also enjoys it more, and they can have a decent impact and like a meaningful impact. That's the word that I was searching for on the solution. So fully agree on that part, like on communicating better, and even when it makes sense to make them part of the process, I feel that is a good one also.
Yeah.
To
One of the tactics
to
that we
embrace.
did at ThoughtSpot that I thought was really powerful is one of my co-leaders, he had this observation that we were basically all on TV now because the company was, remote kind of distributed. And so we communicated a lot through Slack and Zoom and things like that. He's like, okay, so we're all basically on TV and we have all these internal communication channels, which we should sort of treat like social media. And we should basically run an influence campaign inside the company. And so what we started doing, and we did it for about 35 weeks, and then I just kind of ran out of steam, but we would make a video every week that was about 22 minutes long, and we'd make it in Loom, and the video would start. I'd kind of introduce what the team was working on that week, and then the group was divided into 3 different, what we called studios. So smaller teams working on different parts of the product. So I would talk for a few minutes, and then each one of my studio managers would go through and they would describe what was happening in their studio. And they would show projects at whatever level of fidelity they were at. Sometimes it was like these really simplified block frame diagrams, sometimes wireframes, sometimes high-res prototypes, sometimes nothing but words on a whiteboard, whatever it was. They would just kind of expose what they were working on, what the issues were. And then I would come, so each one of them would go, and then I'd come back at the end with some sort of design story, which I typically took from the Apollo program or something. And so we would send that to the whole company through a Slack channel every week. And out of a company of 600, the first couple of videos got like maybe 400 views. Later, it would be down to like 150 or 200 views. But they became known inside the company to the degree that like the sales team started to understand what we were doing. And they would,
That's
some of the
cool.
sales guys would come up to me at company meetings and they would start talking to me. I'd have no idea who they were. And then they would invariably say, "Oh, I know you from the videos." And so I kind of became like
That's
this
smart.
sort of internal YouTube star. And what everybody realized is they would see all the ideas that we were playing with and all the variants, and they developed a much better appreciation for the level of ambiguity we were trying to work through and the level of thoroughness that we were using to arrive at our solutions. And it completely shifted how they thought about what the team was doing. We never had trouble getting headcount after that. We didn't have trouble getting a seat at the table. All that went away. And in fact, design at ThoughtSpot became, at least at that point, one of the 4 competitive pillars of the company. So when you would see our sales presentation, you'd see design as one of those things. And as the head of design, I started getting invited to sales calls to help close deals or convince teams of what was going on, things like that. So
Love it.
like just through those videos, we dramatically raised the profile of design by showing the messy middle. And I'll share a little aside that I think might be useful. About 2 years ago, I saw this prompt on LinkedIn to try on ChatGPT, and I ended up running it. And the prompt is, what is an outdated mindset that I'm hanging on to that's no longer serving me? Let me repeat that. And I suggest everybody run this at home with an
That's a
LLM
good
that you've been
one.
using a lot so it understands you a little bit. What is an outdated mindset that I'm holding on to that is no longer serving me? And what it came back with in my case was it said, given your age and your profession, it's not surprising that you're really attached to the concept of control. But that's not the world we live in anymore. And it kind of went through and explained it better. And it eventually had this phrase, which was meaningful to me, though I know it's just statistically derived. But the phrase was, you need to emphasize choreography over control. And I now kind of really take that to heart, choreography over control. And I think when I was in operating design roles, I wish I had held on to that a little bit more. And the design leaders that I see that are being really successful, I think they're better at being choreographers and not trying to just hammer down the control so much. And certainly being at Apple, like you were supposed to control every last single little pixel, right? And I think that's actually what's culturally been challenging for Apple in the era of AI and probabilistic computing over deterministic computing. They can't control it the way that they're used to controlling everything else. And so at ThoughtSpot, I think I got a little bit more hands off, and I got more comfortable sharing with the company all the stuff we were going to throw away, and I was more comfortable letting them see behind the screen, right? And it helped them understand and appreciate and ultimately respect a lot more what we were doing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. And yeah, the prompt 100%. I'm going to do it after the podcast. I'm really curious now.
You'll be shocked. Yeah, I've done a couple of workshops now where I just where the workshop, the only thing I plan for the workshop is the prompt. And so you get a bunch of people around the table and you give them the prompt and then they all input it. And then you just watch their faces one by one where they're just like, oh my God. And then you just see where the conversation goes. And
Yeah.
every time it's been magical, absolutely magical.
Yeah, it's that side also of AI is like you can do all these kind of cool things as well. And
Yeah.
on this one, okay, let me get my thoughts in order. Yeah, one thing that I wanted to comment on is a beautiful example of how like a ThoughtSpot, like we're talking about a command of 600 people, showing the value of design in the process can look different between a team of 20 versus 600, and how you need to kind of really be systematic and think about it and about what ways would work. Yeah, and I'm curious, you mentioned that you started being like invited in sales calls. That's something that I haven't heard before, about like having a head of design at a sales call. And I'm curious. Yeah, well, what would you mention as a designer over there? Like, would you present like the solution and kind of a pitch, the thinking around it, or what does a designer do on a sales call? I'm curious.
Well, so we were trying to sell that a competitive advantage of the company was that we had superior design. So I think we needed to have a way of explaining how our design team worked and how that was
I
different
see.
from what other companies were doing. So I had a presentation, which I gave many times, which talked about the history of the company and why the company, well, it had a couple of stats about how design can increase the value of a company. Slides, honestly, I don't really believe that McKinsey study and some of these other things. I absolutely don't believe those numbers, but we throw them around because people like numbers.
Yeah.
And then I would tell the story of our founder, a gentleman named Ajit Singh. ThoughtSpot was his second company. He's now on to his third. And Ajit, he'll tell you, like, he grew up in rural India. He's got a degree in chemical engineering. And early in his career, he worked for the American company Honeywell. And during his tenure at Honeywell, they did a couple of engagements with IDEO. And by seeing IDEO and what they did, he just fell in love with design. And so every company he started had this appreciation of design right at the beginning. And so I tell his story to kind of say, design is in the DNA of the company. It is in the founding of the company. That is why I am here. If it wasn't a design led company, you wouldn't have a guy from Apple working here. So we're trying to convince the customer that design matters and it's deep in the company. It's not just a one-shot deal. And then we go through our design process, how the team works. We would show some mechanics of the tools we use because that was typically kind of interesting. We had this whole concept of tenets. So we would talk about design tenets versus design principles, which is always interesting to people. Design principles tend to be things like we should aim for clarity. It should feel secure. It should feel responsive. They're all these single words, which are all great, but they're not useful for making design decisions because nobody would ever argue the opposite. Nobody's like, when you're looking at design, nobody's ever going to say, oh, it's too clear, we should make it confusing. And therefore, why principles are sort of a nice North Star, they don't help you make decisions. Tenets, by contrast, is something I learned at Apple. And tenets are these hard-edged statements that help the team know that when they come to a fork in the road, they should always go left. And so, in the story from Apple is that when they were working on Keynote early on, the guy who was leading Keynote sort of asked Steve Jobs, how should we think about Keynote? And Steve said, I want you to keep three things in mind. One is it should be difficult to make ugly presentations. Two, you should have cinematic quality transitions. And three, you should optimize for innovation over PowerPoint compatibility. And so if we just push on that last one and you think about a team that was struggling with whether to do innovation or PowerPoint compatibility, if they had to confront that issue time and time and time again with every feature, they would eventually balkanize into two groups and they would gouge each other's eyes out. And I saw that happen at Yahoo. I know how that works, right? The team would repeatedly have the same debate over and over and over again until it just calcified. And so the concept of a tenet is you just decide once and for all, and you don't revisit the issue. And so at ThoughtSpot, I started to pay attention to like, what are the debates we kept having over and over again? And we just created tenets to address each of those. And the three tenets we had, I'm pretty sure I can remember them now. Let's see. The three tenets we had was the first one is users should have to opt into complexity, right? So whenever a dialog box opens up or a window opens up, do you show like the full mass of things you can do, or do you show a simplified, approachable version, and then people can turn on knobs and buttons? But given that our product was supposed to be sold to business users and not to trained data analysts, we felt that we should start with a simple version of the feature and let people turn things on. But that's a decision, and there's a rational decision to do it the other way. If, for example, your Tableau, where your market is trained data scientists that want to be able to see the whole thing right from the beginning. But once you make that decision, users should have to opt into complexity. There's a whole lot of downstream debate that goes away. So that was the first one. The second tenet was documentation is a failure state. And we use that one a lot. That was if your instinct is to explain it in the docs or to hide it behind a little eye with a circle, if you had to have explanatory text, you didn't have the feature right. Like nobody wanted to be trained on the software. We just kept hammering that over and over. Nobody wants to learn your software. You're just another tab in somebody's browser, and all they want to do is go home to their children and families, right? Like stop making demands of the users. And so that all got expressed through this tenet of documentation as a failure state. And then the last one was the entire product should look and feel like it came from a single mind, right? And that was our attempt to create a product that was a unified, cohesive, coherent, singular experience, which is radically different from what most enterprise companies do, where they are very content to have a highly fragmented experience where you're clearly moving from one team to the next. And the reason they go for the fragmentation is because it allows them to deconstruct the product into individual design and product teams and let those teams operate independently. But they eliminate a lot of friction by not making the whole thing work together, which was just not how we wanted to function. Like we wanted the whole product to look like it came from a single mind and to be a coherent whole. But that meant that we had to balance every feature with everything else going on in the product, and that creates friction and takes more time to reconcile those issues and stuff. But like once we would, you were asking about the sales calls, when we would take these customers through these tenets and they could understand our thinking, you can imagine that's a very different kind of conversation in a sales
the
call
core principles,
from what they were having with any other company, and actually a lot of those conversations led to invitations for me to talk to design teams at other companies and things like that, because then their design leaders would get really interested in what we were doing and how we functioned and stuff. So
that's a beautiful story. Now everything makes way more sense. And I really love also the idea of like, don't just explain like how it solves your problem, but talk about the philosophy. Like it could be your unique point of view on the market and like how you're actually building this product. And it just makes so much sense to me. I love the approach. And you mentioned something before, the choreography versus control, right? And I'm curious, you already started the story, but I'm curious about another example on this topic. Like just a simple example where you can explain the difference between these two. How do you act in the one way and the other? How does it look like?
I mean, just at a personal level, for example, with the choreography control stuff, I've just gotten much more open about sharing things on LinkedIn that maybe aren't complete. I haven't kept up with it, but there was a couple of weeks when I just sort of made videos and put them up there, not really knowing where they were going to lead. And they ended up being some of the best performing stuff I'd ever done.
I see. Now I'll get it. Yeah.
So I think a lot of time it's giving yourself up to the idea that you don't know what the result's going to be. And I think as a designer, it's, that can be pretty hard. Like if you think about design, let's see, I think this is right. If you think about design presentations, a lot of times designers come in, they try to explain everything before they show you the work. If you think about portfolio reviews, a lot of times they're trying to set up, well, this is the business problem and this is the input I got and blah, 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 blah. And then eventually they show you the work. And what that whole thing is about is they're trying to eliminate the risk of you not liking the work. They're trying to pre-sell it so that by the time you show it, you're already bought in. And I think that's a way of trying to control the room and control how people are going to respond. Because if you just walk in and you go, well, this is it. Here's the thing. You don't really know what's going to happen. And so I think you have to be prepared to think on your feet and kind of choreograph your response to the room when you just show the work. Now, one of the things we learned at Apple is that none of the executives would ever sit through the setup. Like they just don't care. None of them would let you set work up because they knew that you didn't get to set the work up when the user saw it. So, they wanted to have the user's experience of it, which is just show me the thing and I'm going to respond how I'm going to respond. And then we're going to deal with it. So I think it was very frustrating a lot of times when candidates would come to present their portfolios to me, and I was always just like, "Stop it! Show me the comps. Where are the comps?" You know, I was sort of famous for that. There's one of my a woman that ran design ops for me at Pinterest. She used to just laugh about that all the time. Because one of my lines was, "Shut up and show me the comps. I don't care. I don't want the setup. I don't need you to explain the business. Just show me the comps." You know?
Yeah. I fully hear you. I fully hear you. And that's a good one actually. From a personal point of view, like on my side, I've been experiencing like what you described of once you get into entrepreneurship, you have to start being way messier than you are as a designer. And it feels like I now need to develop two sides of myself. The one, like the designer that has like a very clear vision and everything, and then the entrepreneurial, which is more of the mess around and find out kind of a way. Even like this podcast is an example. You could try to make it like perfect, control everything on the experience, or you can just keep it simple and just go and be like, yeah, I'm just going to publish a nice conversation and that's it. It's something, yeah, that hits home. Like I totally understand what you mean, and it's a very interesting one. And also in the world of growth design with A/B testing, where sometimes, like the interesting thing with growth design, and why I love it so much is because it's a big challenge to your ego as well. Like A/B testing, I don't believe this. Like I believe into A/B testing, but I don't believe in outsourcing taste and thinking and decision making into A/B testing. It's like you just need to figure out the right way to use it, and it's a strange feeling when you run an A/B test, and it feels uncomfortable. It was like, let's see, is it gonna work or not? Before the A/B test, you can be fully confident, and sometimes, yeah, like you may have full confidence and faith into solution, but the market can prove you in a different way. That's why I mentioned also the entrepreneurial part. But yeah.
I think designers need to get more comfortable with ideas like choreography and improvisation, things like that. You know, you need to think of yourself like more like you're in a jazz band than like you're in a symphony orchestra, right? You're not playing from the dots. You're not performing the same thing every time. It's also again, when I do portfolio reviews, when I was a hiring manager, you know, I would interrupt designers all the time when they were presenting. Like I wouldn't just sit there and let the lecture go on. I was always stopping them, asking them questions, kind of poking on the work a little bit. Which again, I'm sure some of them thought I was just being rude. What I was trying to do was to test how good they were at thinking on their feet and how well they could respond to criticism or observations in real time, because that's a critical part of the job. And some of them could respond to that better than others.
Fully agree. 100%. Okay, let me think about the next topic. I want to dive a bit deeper into the Apple and Steve Jobs kind of a time of your career on this one. And some topics that I have in the notes is that's something that Brian from the CEO of Airbnb has been talking about recently, the difference between micromanagement and being in the details, right? And I'm curious about your experience on this topic from the different companies that you work with and how you would describe these two versions. What does it really mean to have leadership that is truly into details? Like while I was doing my research, like on other podcasts you've done and things you've shared, like one of the things that you shared, I think, was about Apple, that the C-level, that the executives there have really good taste, for example. And I'm really curious on how does, from your experience, leadership that is really into the details looks like, and how does that collaboration with design look like as well?
Yeah. Well, look, so your first question was micromanagement versus into the details. And to me, micromanagement is my boss is telling me how to do things, right? They're micromanaging me at the methods level, right? They're telling me how to do my job. Whereas an executive that's into the details, they're critiquing my output, but they don't say anything about my process, right? And I think that's an important distinction. Once somebody gets into your process, they're into your business. You know, it's sort of like, I'm going to do things my way, leave me alone, and judge me by what comes out the other end. So I think that's a useful and important distinction. Micromanagers will make everybody crazy. Somebody who manages the details just looks like they're paying attention.
Exactly. Yes.
So, you know, at Apple, there's just a culture of everybody's paying attention to all the details all the time because that's what matters. And so it's not just that the executives, whoever they were like judging everything and asking all these detailed, pointed questions all the time. It's that everybody in the company, everybody you interacted with was asking stuff all the time because they all had a vested interest in the company producing something that was as high quality as could possibly be. Like the bar was world class for everything, everywhere, all the time, which also can be quite maddening. And there's only a certain type of person that survives at Apple for a long time, because to work in that high performing environment is incredibly demanding. But like one of the stories that I like to tell is at least at that time, when I first started working there, you go to Cafe Max, the cafeteria there at the company, and you would get a pizza, and the pizza would come in kind of your standard square cardboard pizza box, and it would have a big box of oil, have a big plot of oil underneath it. And eventually the pizza guys invented their own pizza box, and it was made from a different kind of material. It was round and it was rippled so that the pizza not only stayed warm longer, but also the oil dissipated in a different way. And it was an all around better pizza box. My understanding is they got a patent against the pizza box. I haven't confirmed that one way or the other, but that was my understanding at the time. And so that's an example of somebody deep inside Apple just asking themselves, how can this be better? And the entire company is that way all the time. And there's plenty of stories of Steve asking some pointed detail about something on the online store. I was on occasion, I was in email threads where he had gotten an email from a customer asking about something, and he or somebody on his team would be forwarding that off to the different groups around the company to get them to work on it. So, some of you or some of your listeners may have read with Tim Cook's recent announcement of stepping down. He talked about how he starts every day at, I think, 5 a.m. reading inbound customer emails. Like, that's something that I don't think people realize the power of that for Apple, both in the case of Tim and Steve, because they both had very public email addresses. Steve at Apple, Tim at Apple. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And Apple has an army of fans and users around the world that fortunately hold the company to very, very high account. And so when design fails, you've got all these people that are sending notes into the executive teams to the CEO, and those CEOs then escalate those. So Apple's in this really interesting feedback loop with its user base, where the user base is forcing the company to maintain a high standard. And as annoying as it was, we eventually did get to something like that at ThoughtSpot as well. Because we were competing on design, it mattered to the company. And as the team became more well-known through the videos and other means, if we came up with something that people didn't think was up to snuff, they would call us out, and they would push back. And it was, there was times when I'm like, oh my God, I have to take more comments from the peanut gallery. And it would be very frustrating for me as an individual. But then I tried to calm myself by saying, well, look, it actually means they care.
Exactly.
And I would say that I know there's a lot of frustration with the liquid glass release, and people thought it was really bad, but just like, ask yourself, the mere fact you can be this disappointed and this upset tells you how high regard you have for Apple, right?
Yes,
like there's really not another company that could release a design that was that far off the mark where you would care that much. Like if Google messed something up, or Facebook messes something up, like
it's more kind of expected.
Yeah, of course they did. I mean, another one, so I think Steve did that for Apple and holding Apple to account around design. I actually think Tim's done an amazing job doing that around the issue of privacy for the company. And so people inside the company now realize that privacy is sort of an existential value, and that if they flub that up, it's a real issue. So just, again, do the thought exercise. Imagine that there's a data leak and all your Instagram credentials get shared. You'd kind of go, yeah, kind of expected that. Now imagine that happens to your Apple accounts. You're going to be like, whoa. Like, wait a minute. I can't believe those guys messed it up. Like, you're going to be upset in a very different way. So I think as a design leader, there's an opportunity for a lot of designers to say, oh, I really want the company to be so into what we're doing at design that I'm going to be getting feedback from everybody around the company because they care that much. Again, it's pretty annoying. It's
not a fun environment. Yeah.
It's not, but I do think it's a good signal that people care and that what you're doing matters.
Yeah, 100%. On this one, I have one question with the world-class part, because it's a personal challenge that I have like all these years, and I can't tell if there is a solution or what is the solution. So I'm really curious about your experience. So the challenge is, you want world-class quality, right? Like, that's what inspires you, that's what you aim for, that's what you're here for. Like, you want to see this level of quality in your design. But then there's the real-life constraints of timelines, like the resource management. So money and time, like how much budget do you have? How much time do you have? And the velocity you need to move with. So one of the principles, I'm not sure if you know Basecamp, Jason Fried and DHA, it's like it's a really cool company, and they have the SEPA book, and one of the principles is flex the scope and keep the deadline fixed. So it's a principle that I kind of love, because the more time you give something, the better you can do. And it can be also a bit of a dark hole that goes against business principles where you need to make progress. But I don't know. I also, sometimes I'm like, you know what, screw the deadline. We need to make it better. Like, this is not up to our standards. So I'm not sure if there is a process in the end, or if it's just all about gut feeling and personal intuition to learn where you draw the line for every project you work on, because not every project has the same significance, for example, for the company and for the customers and so on. So yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on this topic, because I think it's a challenging one for many designers out there as well, in companies.
Yeah. So look, world class might be the wrong standard. World class is a result. It's a consequence of a lot of things. I think at the individual designer level, you have to realize that the constraints that you have, the time frame within which, and constraints could mean both the constraints of the project and how many resources you have. One of those constraints is time. Like, how much of an investment can you make in this thing? And so if you think about the information you have at the moment, the amount of resources you have, all these different factors, is the thing that you produced the best work that you could do given all those factors? Like, are you proud of your effort? If we think about it in sports terms, if I go and I'm going to try to set a PR running a 5K, if I'm feeling great and I'm feeling in a great day and I set a PR, well, that's terrific. If I'm older or I'm injured and my time is less, I still put in my best effort. I should still feel great about that race, even if the final outcome maybe wasn't as good. I don't know if that's a perfect metaphor, but with every design that you produce, I think you just have to constantly be asking, is this the best I could do given all the circumstances? Or at some point, did you just fold? At some point, did you just get too tired and you just gave up? And when it comes to deadlines, it's sort of like, did you run through the tape? Did you do everything you could given the time you were given? Or did you sort of slack off because the deadline didn't seem like enough, and so you just didn't take the effort seriously? And I've always tried to hold my team more to account of, did they do the best they could given the resources and time and everything else that they had? And then I look to the company, and I've never argued with people about headcount. I've always told executives, the company funds my team at the level that they're comfortable investing. My job is to give you a good return on that investment. So if you want to give me 10 heads, I'm going to give you 10 heads of design effort. If you want world-class design, I'm telling you, that's probably more like 15 to 20 heads. But you can tell me that doesn't matter. That's not the most important thing. And I'm going to trust that because you're running the company. So again, my job was always do the best.
That's a really good one.
With what I had. Sometimes that was world-class if the company was set up in the right way and all these other factors, but it being world-class was a consequence. I couldn't control that. What I could control was it the best we could do at the time with the resources we've been given. And so I think that's the thing that maybe people need to focus on. I'll also say on the deadlines thing, because you said, if I had more time, I could make it better. Actually, you couldn't. There's a point where more time becomes really a negative factor. So I can't remember which artist it was. I can't remember who it was, but they said, I don't need more time. I need more deadlines, And John Lasseter from Pixar, he had a great line, which is, our movies are never finished. They're merely released. So I always think that the trick is to set a deadline that gives you enough time, but not quite. And that's actually probably where you're going to do
the healthy pressure. Yeah.
I mean, you look at the Beatles, just for one example, it's top of mind. Everything the Beatles did, from their first album to the rooftop concert in Abbey Road, actually, that whole thing, like all those albums, everything, those tours, the movies, the TV, like the whole kit and caboodle of the Beatles, it's like 7 years. I don't think the Beatles get better if you give them 14 years. I think they got a lot done in 7 years. And then unsurprisingly, they're completely burnt out and spent and all needed some downtime. And then amazingly went on, 3 of the 4 of them went on to have amazing solo careers as well. But I don't think and the same's true of many other musicians. They have this kind of 1 decade or less period where they just crank out an amazing amount of stuff. And I don't think it gets better because they have more time.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Is that at some point and after, it doesn't really add value anymore, and doesn't have any impact. And I really like your perspective on this. It's very, very helpful on the always understand like the constraints and judge the outcome based on that. It's something, and also try to maximize, like do your best effort and try to, maximize the return over kind of the on the constraints that you have, and think about like AI even right now, and how can you improve design quality. So just want to share like a personal thought on this one to discuss. I've been thinking that like investing into design, especially for a bootstrap company, it's something you can prioritize, you can do, but it's very tricky in general because it can be very expensive and you can do it up to a certain extent depending on the growth stage that you are as a company. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how can we have more impact without being in control fully of the design? Like with AI, how can we, for example, a small detail, how can we write a UX writing guidelines, like some guidelines for AI when developers build stuff to at least have better copy, more human-centered copy, like things that are easier to read and understand. And just kind of find small pieces where you can add value without being the person that has to design this whole thing. And a topic that I find very fascinating, and I can't say that the industry is going to do this or something, but I feel there is something there worth exploring, is how can you train your engineering team to be more design centric? So I always think, how can I have an impact versus control everything? One way is to have my own design projects, but another way would be maybe to do like design hackathons with the developers and teach them about basics of design thinking. And this way impact the culture and make engineering to ship better UX, let's say, to production. It's a very interesting one. And what you said that I need more deadlines, not time, it's also very interesting because once you have the constraints, it's very clear boundaries on how creative you can get. And yeah, like you need these limits to start thinking about solutions. Otherwise it can get really, really chaotic. So yeah, these are some kind of the personal things that I've been experiencing on my side on that topic, which is...
Well, I think, so one of the questions you hit in there, I think is really interesting, which is how do you raise the taste level of your engineering team? And one of the reasons that I have not been a supporter of this argument that taste is what's going to save design and taste is what's going to differentiate products is because I don't think that the user base is particularly sophisticated. So I don't think the user base values taste. And if the user base doesn't value taste, I don't know how you compete on taste. And I just remind people that if you look across the world, most of the most popular products are not the highest quality. If you think that that Americans, for example, have great taste in food, then you have to wonder why McDonald's is the most popular restaurant in the country, right? Those things don't align. If you look at Instagram, you get the sense that not that many people have particularly good taste in photography. They may be getting good at the production values of photography, but I challenge you to remember any picture you've seen on Instagram other than with friends and family. They just have no meaning. Whereas in your head, you could probably pull up 10 Pulitzer Prize winning news photographs. So the quality of the photography on Instagram, even though it's kind of this nice eye candy stuff, it's not good photography. It's completely absent of meaning. So when we look at software, like, do users, the engineers, to executives, do people really understand what's a great software experience? And an exercise that people could run is get a small group of engineers. You can't do it in a big room, but if you had like 5 people, 5, maybe 10 people, just go around the room and ask people, can you name your 3 favorite apps? I'm yet to meet a designer that can name their 3 favorite apps. Like usually when I ask that question, people are just stopped in their tracks and they're just like, I don't know. And then they open their phone and they start highlighting things that they use all the time, which has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good product. They just happen to use it all the time. Like usage and whether or not you think it's well done are 2 completely different things. I think Bach's Goldberg Variations is the most amazing piece of music ever written, but I don't listen to it every day. So I think just by calling people's attention to, are you actually watching software and thinking about what's good and getting them into that conversation of what are your 3 favorite apps and then why? And as a design leader, you could probably facilitate the discussion. And you don't really have to tell them why A is better than B. You just have to get them to start asking those questions. And they'll sort of start to develop their own natural philosophy. They've just never really thought about it before. So I think that's one part. Like users don't. And again, I've never met a designer that can answer that question. So if you're listening at home, and I'm not going to put you on the spot here, Jim, but if you're listening at home, just in your own head, most of you people are designers, for goodness sakes. I mean, if you were musicians or filmmakers, and I asked you what your favorite album was or what your favorite movie was, I couldn't get you to shut up about it. Like you would go off. You wouldn't be able to name 3 because there would be so many candidates. And yet all of us have spent decades working in tech. And off the top of our head, we couldn't name 3 products that we really like because they're so well done. Like that's just a crazy gap. So I think, the design industry, I think all of us just need to realize when we talk about taste, like where is the general level of taste and how do we raise that? Even in graphic design, I mean, I live in the United States. Graphic design in the United States is just for crap. It's horrible. Go to Japan. Well, actually, graphic design in Japan is pretty challenging. Software design in Japan is absolutely horrible, like shockingly bad in Japan. And they sort of know it. You go to Europe, graphic design's incredible, industrial design's incredible. So, when we talk about taste as the thing that's going to separate software design from everything else, like, I don't know, man. We got people got to develop some better taste. And how do we do that?
Yeah, there is a lot of hype also around taste. Like, what is the new mode? The taste is the new mode, and all these things. Like, I don't get. Like, we work on this one. Now that you mentioned it, we work with B2B SaaS, right? And one thing that I love B2B SaaS as a designer is that I find many super ugly products that make many millions. And why do I like this as a designer? Is because it's been a big lesson for me that good design is subjective, and what people need is not always like amazing UX. And amazing UX sometimes comes down to, is this part of the product strategy? For example, like Linear, one of the design, like a very design-centric companies on the product management space, they position as the best kind of a UX in the market. It's like their unique differentiation.
That's totally their competitive advantage.
Whereas like when it comes to Jira and other ones, people don't use it for this reason. It's just a difference. So also like on the taste and design, it really comes down, another thing is like the business strategy on how do you position on the market. Like ZenMade, one of the teams we're working with, we're positioned as the easiest to use in the market versus like Made Central, like a competitor. They're super complex, but they're very robust. So they're more like for bigger companies. It's more like enterprise in the cleaning business. So that's something, an observation that I've done like in the past, and I fully agree on everything you mentioned on the taste topic.
Well, so I gave a talk years ago about how every company, and actually every industry, they start out by competing on functionality. And then once functionality has commodified and equalized, then they start to compete on business things. So business things can include like distribution, pricing, custom enterprise sales, supply chain optimization. It's all the business stuff. And then after all the business value has commodified, then finally you can start competing on design. But you can't compete on design unless you have all those other things down, right? So if we look at Google, and again, it's nothing against Google, but if you look at Google, they largely compete on functionality. Like none of us use Google because we think they have an incredible UX. We use Google because they have incredible capabilities, which is fantastic. They haven't had to move beyond that because nobody else can reach what they can do functionally. Then we look at Amazon. Why do we use Amazon? We use Amazon because they're crushing it on the business stuff. Like their distribution network, their supply chains, their delivery, like they are just crushing it on that. There are many, many other much better e-commerce experiences and many places where I can replace most of the functionality of Amazon, but I can't replace the delivery times, the availability. Like they just nailed it on all this business type stuff. And then you have companies that have to compete on design, and Apple's a good example here. Like they have to have all that functionality. Apple wouldn't be able to survive if they didn't have parity on functionality with most everybody else. And then they've got all the business stuff. They have incredible supply chains, incredible ops. They've got incredible retail stores. It's incredible value for what they're delivering. They've nailed all that stuff. And so now they get the opportunity to compete on design because that's how they're going to differentiate themselves. And it works really well for them because they get, I think it's 35% margins on consumer electronics when their competitors are getting 5%. Like that's the value of design. You think about like how much more profit margin they're able to generate, even though they're less than 50% of smartphone sales around the world. Last time I looked, they were like 110% of revenue from smartphones because the Android carriers take more stuff back than they take in. I don't think that's quite right anymore, but still, if you look at their market share versus sales share, like they make a ton, or profit share. I think it's market share versus profit share. They make the vast majority of profits in smartphones, even though they only have 50% of the market from a market share perspective. And it's because of design. Like if they were just competing on the business layer or the functionality layer, they wouldn't be able to get those kinds of margins out of it.
Yeah, it's a very good one. Also like the perceived value and how you can grow your margins like through a better experience, because you're focused like on quality. It's like how do you compete on the market? Is it like that you have people that appreciate quality versus people that just want to solve the problem and don't really care? Um, yeah, yeah, it's
That's
a
what I'm
very,
saying,
very
like user
interesting
benefit.
one.
Like at some point you have to look at how the users are responding and is taste something that's going to matter? Like design probably doesn't make the difference for everything. Now you and I as designers, we may, I have a very strong moral position that we should be designing things for the human environment and that we should care about the people on the other side of the glass. I think the
Mm-hmm.
Golden Gate Bridge is a better bridge than the Bay Bridge because it's so superior aesthetically. When I look at the Golden Gate Bridge, my heart is lifted. My soul feels better. Every time I
Right.
drive across that bridge, I look out the sunroof so I can see those towers. Every single time. I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times, and still I do it. The Bay Bridge, it's a perfectly great bridge. I mean, it functions as a bridge. It gets me across some Treasure Island in San
Exactly. It's
Francisco
just
quite
functional.
well, but it doesn't lift my soul in any meaningful way. So I
Mm-hmm.
personally very much want to live in a Golden Gate world. But I can also understand that there are many other people that are reasonably satisfied with the Bay Bridge world.
Beautiful analogy, beautiful example, and yeah, yeah. You really kind of this really hits kind of in a deeper way. Like I really recognize all the feelings that you've described, and like I as a designer, like if you ask me why are you investing your life energy into design, because as a human, like I have this creative energy, I could invest into something else. Like why product design is, I always like, it sounds really cliche, but I strongly believe that great design, or let's say better design or great design, can make the world a better place, because design is really about care
Yeah.
and love, right? It's really
Yeah.
what you described. Like if I think about urban design, since we started discussing, because before we started recording about Amsterdam, like one thing that I love about the Netherlands, originally from Greece, by the way. I grew up in Athens, in the south part of Europe. Athens is a really messy city, no plan, no structure, just kind of a lot of buildings thrown in there. Amsterdam has a lot of structure, and now we bought a house in a new neighborhood close to Amsterdam, which is newly built, and you can see that there were people that really thought about the details. What's going to be the ground exactly? Like what kind of rocks are we going to use? What's the color of the bricks of all these houses we're going to build? How are we going to make a playground and the house around? How are we going to create a more social environment? If you use design in a good way, it just makes life so much better. And it's like the quality of life itself. It makes you feel things, it makes you develop better habits. That's why for me, if I would get out of product design, I would love to get into urban design, honestly. Like design
Yeah.
environments people
Yeah.
can live, because that's where it can truly make a difference in their life. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, look, I completely feel the same way. And design is how we show empathy and care and support. And I always describe it as the people on the other side of the glass. And one of the things I like working on software is that, I've worked on products that have been used by 1 billion people. Like, nobody knows who I am. Like, how many other industries could I work in where I could touch 1 billion lives?
Yes.
None.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. And so I try to always keep in mind the people on the other side of the glass. Unfortunately, because we work in a medium that's also intermediated, so we never see the audience, it's very easy to lose track with the fact that there's 1 billion people on the other side of the glass, which is, I think, what makes it so easy for companies to make bad choices on behalf of their user because they just don't see the downstream benefit. And to go
Yeah.
back to my story about working in Apple retail, that was really the only time in my career when I could go watch somebody use something that I had worked on and see them operating it in real time in the wild. And so it created a connection between my decisions as a designer and the impact of their life. Like I could see that connection in a very real way. Not too long ago, I had the privilege of getting to talk to the design team at Toast that make the handheld point of sale system for restaurants. And I was
Yeah.
telling them, like, tonight, all of you are going to be at dinner with this grandma in Ohio, and she's going to be at dinner with her 2 grandsons, and the bill's going to come due, and the server's going to bring over the Toast device, and they're going to hand it to her. And she's either going to know what to do or she's not. And if she knows what to do, she's going to look like a hero to her teenage grandsons. And if she doesn't, they're going to grab it from her and go, "Here, grandma, let me show you how to do that." And she's going to feel like an idiot. And so which one's it going to be? Because you guys are going to decide. Like you are at that table with this lovely grandmother in Ohio. Are you going to make her life better or not? And I think, I mean, I couldn't really see them because we were on Zoom. I think it had an impact on them. I think it drew them back to the reality of what they're working on. And so I try to remind designers of that all the time, engineers and product people too. I think it's just very easy to lose sight of that again because we're not in real space with our audience. you kind of forget they exist, and you get caught up in your own needs and your own demands of shipping on time and hitting this deadline and making this profit margin and blah, 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 blah. And you forget that you're like actually hurting people. And I think if the creators of software could understand directly the damage that they're doing, the confusion they're injecting into people's lives, the frustration that they're injecting into people's lives, I think they'd be a lot more careful.
So I know we're a bit over time, but if you're okay, I would really want to go a bit deeper into this. Like I had it on my agenda.
Yeah.
The topic is, how can you become truly more user-centric when you're not the user, right? Because when you design, let's say for the Apple Store, you have the benefit of being, like you can actually use it and sell for yourself. I'll bring an example of a team that I'm working with. Like use it as an example where we can brainstorm a few ideas. Is ZenMate. So it's a scheduling software for cleaning businesses. So imagine like a cleaner that is transitioning to a cleaning business owner. They hired 3-4 cleaners, and they're using a software to manage the calendar, send invoices, collect payments, pay their team, and essentially run the whole business. They spend hours every day using that software, right? So they really rely on this to run their business. And one of the challenges that I have on design is that I'm not a cleaning business owner, but I need to design for them, and I need to empathize with them and feel them. And I've been looking into creating rituals. I'm a strong believer of habits and rituals, and not just doing one-time user research. You do a bunch of interviews and then you disappear for the full year. But actually, how can I build rituals that are going to bring me closer to them? One was that we have a really good customer we've been working for years, and she's joining our design calls. So we have at least one person. Many people say, no, like this is not a good idea because this is not statistically correct and so on. But it's really it really changed our minds, because you can get at least one perspective. One is better than none in this case. And you can tell yourself if it represents most of the customer audience. So that's one of the rituals we found that was a really good contribution with also low complexity, because we just paid them for a few hours per month to join us. But I'm curious, how do you approach this topic, and what are some rituals maybe you've seen or you developed, let's say, at like the companies that you worked in the past, on how to become truly user-centric? And just another quick example before I pose is, we have this idea, like Amar and Alex, the CEO of the city of the company, that we should go and rent a van and just travel through the states of US and just visit cleaning business owners and just kind of talk to them about ZenMate and so on, and see how they're experiencing it. And I feel as a designer, I want to do something like that. Just go and shadow some of them, or just go and fly and spend 1 week doing only this thing, hanging out with cleaning business owners, observe their lives, how they use the software, where they get frustrated, and just do it as a fun experiment for a week. So yeah, that's just an example that I wanted to share, and I'm really curious to hear about your thoughts and the mindset you have on this topic.
Yeah. So look, your instinct on it being a ritual is totally the right one, right? And I think everybody needs to cling to that. Research is not a one-shot deal. It's got to be something where you're refreshing that all the time. So ideally, it's something weekly or bi-weekly, but you need to be kind of in constant contact with your audience. So there are a lot of different mechanical ways we could talk about doing that. One of the things we started doing at ThoughtSpot, which was wildly more useful than I expected it to be, and is generally accessible to people that are working in bigger companies. Almost all enterprise software company, once they get past a certain size, is going to have what's called a customer success team. And so this is a group that sits inside sales that goes and works with customers to help them adopt the software and make sure that it's working well. Those customer success people are incredibly good proxies for your users, because they're seeing what the audience is dealing with at all these different points in the software, and they already work for your company. So we took some of those folks, and we learned, I'd been there a couple of years before we realized that for every major project, we really needed a customer success person on the design team, as part of the early team, to help us shape the product, because they would understand how people were using the feature and what was going on. They didn't necessarily help us build empathy with what the users were dealing with, but they helped us understand functionally what the product needed to do and what our solutions were and weren't appropriate. So they were a great proxy for the knowledge that we didn't have about the problem space. So that's kind of one technique. At Airbnb, I know the gentleman who runs all the product and marketing there, Hiroki Azai. Hiroki and I used to work together at Apple, and I heard Hiroki on an interview, and he said that at Airbnb, they've been able to collect an enormous number of short videos from hosts and guests who have stayed or rented Airbnbs, talking about their experience with Airbnb and what it meant to them. And so they've got like hundreds of these things, and they can go in at any moment and just watch this enormous collection of 2 or 3 minute videos of people talking about what the service means to them. That's not going to tell you a lot about a particular feature, but it's going to help you understand people's relationship with the company, which I think is also a very important kind of emotional conduit back to your audience. So that was another interesting technique. In Apple Retail, because it was a real life environment, I would routinely just drop and go into one of the stores and just sort of sit and hover and sort of be a voyeur watching the store, not necessarily talking to anybody, but just kind of watching what was going on. So that was a useful way to maintain a touch point. And then one other technique you might consider, and you mentioned going on a roadshow to talk to people about how they were using the product. I might encourage you to expand that and just go try to talk to people that are in the business and try to understand the mindset of a cleaning operator owner, or of a cleaning company owner, and what they're thinking about kind of outside the constructs of your particular software. Because as soon as you're asking about your particular software, you're naturally, some part of you is going to be curious, but some part of you is also going to be defensive, because you're going to want them to like the software, and they're going to say things differently because they want to please you. There's just a social thing that happens in those interactions. They keep you from getting unbiased feedback. And so when you go into an environment with somebody who is in the space and you just try to develop an understanding of their mindset outside what the technology is doing, I think you'll get better ideas down the road. It won't help you design a feature right now, but it will help you down the road. There's a great story. I can't remember what the company is, but they're a company that it's a multi-billion-dollar company that helps companies in the United States, helps medical clinics in the United States negotiate between Medicare and their billing system.
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah. I don't remember the name, but I've seen that one.
Yeah, if I remember, the insight for the company is they were just going and watching in doctors' offices all the billing clerks. And what they noticed is they all had these Post-it notes all around their monitor. And on the Post-it notes were all these obscure Medicare codes that they had to input for different procedures. And so one of their insights was, could we create a piece of software that would eliminate the need for these Post-it notes? Like that was kind of the whole idea, and that turned into like this incredible, multi-billion-dollar company. So there's something, some of the techniques the last technique I mentioned is, it's sort of in the vein of ethnography, which is a technique used from anthropology. So I think there's an enormous value for designers, and actually engineers and others, just to go in and take an anthropological approach and do some sort of ethnography study without talking about the technology. Like just put all that aside and just go see what people are trying to accomplish. And it's likely that out of that, one, you'll develop a greater empathy and understanding for the mindset of the user and the problem they're facing. But you also might come up with technological solutions to the work they're the work they're doing and the tasks they're trying to accomplish, that are not merely electronic simulations of what they're already doing. Right? You might be able to conceive of completely different ways of achieving the goals that they have using technology that they couldn't describe or think about themselves.
Yeah, I fully agree on everything, and I really agree, and like love what you said is like, don't focus on the product, actually expand the scope and see how that product fits into their life, and understand them more as a human and as a business owner. Like, how do they run the business? What are some challenges? And like look at the whole picture.
Just kind
don't
of watch them.
Focus. Exactly.
Yeah, again, if people would go spend a little time just studying some of the methods of anthropology, and I'm not saying anybody's going to be, I'm not trying to compare this to academic anthropology, which is a completely different endeavor. I'm just saying that there's some of the techniques that anthropologists use that could be useful in some sort of primitive form. Another great story is when the team at Pixar decided to work on the movie Cars. They knew that they wanted to kind of capture this Route 66 style of the American West and the American road trip. And so what they did is they took a bunch of people and they did a road trip along what used to be Route 66. And they visited all these old places and they drove through those deserts and drove along those roads, and that then turned into the visual look and the places that you think of in the movie Cars. I mean, that's where the idea for something like the Cozy Cone comes from, or Radiator Springs. They went and they did the road trip. So there is something super powerful for you guys that you would have by doing a road trip and going in these people's environments and in their offices, following them as they go on their nightly routines to do the cleaning of the office buildings and whatnot, and like really walking a mile in their shoe. you will definitely come up with better solutions that you would otherwise have never thought of.
Yeah, I'm taking some notes while we're discussing as well on this. Yeah, I feel like maybe this is the year to go and give it a try. I fully agree. Super. Thanks a lot for all the insights. And last quick question, and we can wrap it up, is what's your favorite app and why? Like you mentioned that it's something you ask all designers. It's fine because I ask every guest, what's your favorite SaaS? Because we're mostly into B2B SaaS, but it doesn't have to be a SaaS. And for me, what you said that people keep bringing like products that they just use all the time. Like for me, I would say like, what is a product that makes you feel something, like a level, like a decent amount of excitement and kind of a wow effect in the last, I don't know, like month or year that comes to your mind? Is there anything?
Yeah, so I have this one a little practiced. It's about I look at apps that I think are doing something interesting and novel and that show me that they're thinking harder. So although the product I think has kind of dropped off, is not nearly as successful as I would have hoped it would have been. One of my favorite apps from a while back is Pitch, which is an online slideshow production tool.
The Pits.com. Yeah.
Yeah, pitch.com from the guys that did Wunderlist. Yeah, I think they're
Yeah.
based out of Berlin, if I recall.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about Pitch is they did at least back up and try to reconsider what it meant to create a slide deck in the modern era. And so the way that they created collaboration at the level of a slide, for example, like that's just kind of an interesting little feature that you could assign a slide to somebody, I thought was really interesting. I also thought it was really interesting. They had some mechanism where if you reordered a list, they would switch everything around for you. So like if you had a bullet list, you could drag bullet 5 up to bullet 2, and it would push everything down and renumber everything. And it was like, oh, they actually they paid attention to how people are manipulating objects. Yeah, and I really appreciated the care that they had put in. This is one where they lacked key functionality for me. The way that they treated master templates and the way that they treated transitions wasn't what I needed. So I've still am kind of wedded to Keynote, but I thought that the Pitch team, I thought they did some wonderful design in terms of reimagining how you could accomplish some of these tasks inside the tool. So that's one example I use of a product that I think in certain ways got things really right. And then another one that I really like is a product called Habitica, and Habitica is a to-do manager and task list type thing. So there are lots of to-do managers. Most of them you make a list and you check stuff off. Some of them maybe have some sort of gamification where they give you an award after you've tapped off a certain number of things or something like that. What's interesting about Habitica is rather than gamifying your habits and your to-do stuff, it actually is a game. At its core, it is the conceptual model of a role-playing game. And the gameplay is doing your habits, your daily habits, and checking things off your to-do list. And so in the case of Habitica, when you start the tool, it asks you, do you want to be I think it's a warrior, a healer, or a mage? And then you have to give yourself a name. And then as you do your things and mark them off, you get points. You collect gold and mana and stuff like that. And if you don't do things, then you lose your life force and stuff like that. Eventually you can go down different levels and you work your way up these levels, and you can buy armament, and you can eventually collect eggs, and then you can go out on quests with your friends. So if you have other friends in the tool, you can get 4 or 5 people together, and you go on the quest together, and you eventually get to take on a boss when you've made a certain number of points. And if people don't do stuff, then the team fails, things like that. So what I love about Habitica is that they flipped the conceptual model. So it fundamentally is a game. And again, the gameplay is doing your habits and your to-do list versus trying to gamify what is fundamentally a habit tracker. And so, I describe it as they blended conceptual models in a really interesting way. And I think of conceptual models like a movie genre. And so if we look at a film like Star Wars, what's really interesting about Star Wars is that Star Wars mixes the genre of a space movie and a cowboy movie. And so Star Wars is basically a cowboy movie set in space with World War II dogfighting scenes in the middle, right? And so what George Lucas is doing is he's blending these different conceptual models or genres to create something new. And I don't think much software, I actually haven't met any software teams that think deeply about the conceptual model of what their product is. Like fundamentally, what is this thing, and how do we want it to be? How do we want the user's mind to represent it? They just fall into whatever the first idea is. Like most products have kind of there's an obvious conceptual model, but it's typically not the best one, and people don't really design at the conceptual model level. very well. And I think that's a huge miss, because if you get the conceptual model right, or you do it interesting, that's when you can really point the user in different directions. And I think designing at the conceptual level, at the conceptual model level, may be the key differentiator in products moving forward. Yeah, because if we just look at to-do managers for a moment, like if you choose Things, which is another app I really like, if you use Things versus Apple Reminders versus it's the Omni to-do thing or Todoist, like all these different things, they're slightly different conceptual models on how to manage your day. And functionally, they're all kind of the same, but again, conceptually, they're slightly different. And so we all have our preferences because that concept fits us slightly differently.
That's a beautiful insight. It's like
it's like you mentioned Basecamp earlier. Like, what's really the difference between Basecamp, Asana, and Monday? And it's they could just kill each other over features, but that's not really it. They all three of them have slightly different ideas about how teams work together and how they should get work done. This is one of my biggest disappointments with Slack. is that Slack was this interesting moment when they could have really shifted inter-office communication and done something really magical if they had spent time to really think about it and take a philosophical approach as to how inter-office communication, inter-group communication should happen to benefit collaboration and productivity. And they didn't really. They stumbled into this internet relay chat thing, and then they just built a bunch of stuff on top of it. And so now we have Slack, and is Slack better than email? Maybe. Is Slack the best way any of us can imagine communicating? Not really. Yeah. I think it was just and I love that team. I love Stuart. Like, I've got a lot of respect for what they've accomplished, but I don't know, like, I look at them like, I don't know how to use Slack. And people are like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know what Slack wants me to do. Like, I don't know how to operate the user interface, but I don't know how to really use Slack to maximum effect inside a company. What's a conversation versus what's a channel? Blah, 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 blah. And it's
very, very true.
Yeah. It's a smorgasbord of things without a real point of view.
Yeah, like it's really what you said, like the point of view. And like on Slack, I also recognize the feelings. Like it's really kind of hard for my productivity when I open Slack. It's always busy. I'm like, but I cleared my inbox, like all the messages yesterday. Yeah, but it's still busy. And it's so hard to focus. And it's really what you said is like, yeah, it's the approach and what do you define as success? Like with Slack, do you want to just be better than email, or do you want to find really one of the most productive ways for people to do work and communicate, which is two different
so that's, I mean, they're an interesting example because they didn't really set out to redesign inter-office communication. They were creating a video game, and then they created this internal comms tool because they were all remotely, they were a distributed company or a distributed group. And so they invented this internal tool, and then it seemed pretty cool. And then Stuart did what Stuart did with Flickr too, which is he just pivoted and he said, well, forget the video game. Let's go do this other thing.
This is the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. And, credit to him. They sold it for whatever it was, like $25 billion or something. And he's living a great life now.
For sure.
Yeah. I got to work with him briefly at Yahoo after the Flickr acquisition. He's a terrific guy. Deserves all the credit and all the success he's had. But I still think Slack was a missed opportunity.
I totally hear you. Super. Thanks a lot for today. Yeah, we had a really, really beautiful episode, like so many great insights. And I can't wait actually to share the recording with the teams, because also like with the ZenMate team, it's something that I feel that they're going to really love. And like the depth of what I really like in our conversation and you is like the depth of your thinking actually. And also like when I asked you about the apps, like which app do you like, is how like what are the things that you appreciate as a senior designer as well, like the mental models that they're using, the product strategy, the approach, and what makes you feel something versus somebody else that is not into product design. That's always interesting with the guests, is that depending on the background, there are different things that make them feel connected or excited about a product. So thanks a lot for your time. That's been really, really
my pleasure. Really Thanks for having me, man. This is great.